Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mind the Gaps. I'm here with my friend Evgeny Terekhin, who I met. Well, I first started following him on Substack and just reading his posts a lot about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and kind of the mystical underworkings of the Inklings. And I just was enraptured by his writing and ended up reaching out. And we've had a couple really good conversations, just delving into the personal and spiritual and maybe even sociological implication of a lot of these works. And and there's something that's really deep and also really accessible about it because it's stories that we all know: Lord of the Rings, Narnia, all of these things that are just in our psyche from childhood that we can actually look and see a little bit deeper into maybe what these writers were trying to capture. And has a couple of books. The first one I read was um, Elven Hidden Gems in the Works of the Inklings. And then he recently has this new one, 44 Mystical Insights into the Fantasy Books of Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and Owen Barfield. And you can get this on Amazon, and I'll put some links and stuff in the description. But yeah, so I thought you could just introduce yourself and say a little bit about what got you interested in these subjects and a little bit of what we might talk about today.
hmm Well, thanks, Jake. My name's in Russian. It's Evgeny. In America, I'm Eugene, and we live in Friendswood, Texas. I live here with my wife and three children. I'm a professional translator. I started my career in translation in '93, and I've translated over 100 books, including some works of Luther, Calvin, Spurgeon, Owen Barfield, C.S. Lewis, a couple of other people. Uh, and, so, how did I get interested in the subject? It was actually in the '90s when somebody introduced me to C.S. Lewis, and it must have been one of my American friends that came over to Siberia where I lived. And when you start reading Lewis, you either like him or you don't like him. It's like either he resonates or he doesn't. And he resonated with me. And I don't think I started with Chronicles of Narnia. I think I started with his essays. And one of the first ones was The Weight of Glory. And there's a certain Lewis tends to be very logical, even more so than Tolkien and Barfield and other Inklings. But at the same time, he has this really a romantic streak about him, which kind of came out in this essay. And I'm so glad that by God's providence, that was the first. I think it was the first book that I ever came across by Lewis, and that's where he talks about the argument from desire, and that one really struck me because basically he says that if we were created for this earth, then this earth would have given us everything that we need, and all our desires would be fulfilled. And yet, history knows a lot of people who have tried to fulfill all their desires on earth, and they have failed miserably. Like Ecclesiastes is really a telling example of one of these people, and there are so many books about that. So being written that and his conclusion was that we must have been created for another world. You know, if all my desires combined cannot be fulfilled by this earth, it's just an indication that we were made for something else. And then I started reading Chesterton, the Everlasting Man, who kind of says the same thing,
Hmm.
that we just ended up on the wrong star or something like this. It was really fascinating the way he puts it. And so that kind of started me on this journey of discovering what planet are we from. I mean, what kind of creatures are we? Thing. And then of course I got introduced to Tolkien, which was kind of another aspect, another side of the Inklings, because Tolkien is less logical. He's more into myth and legend and story. And well, I don't know where to start talking about Tolkien. It's so huge. And then somebody finally introduced me to Barfield, his fairy tale, the Silver Trumpet, which also at first I didn't quite get it, but then my wife actually helped me she gave me some clues as how to read him, and that's when I started to get him really, and so these three are my favorites so far.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I'm answering your questions. I forgot what the question was actually.
Yeah, that was great. So just kind of what brought you to kind of writing about and thinking about the things that you do. And I think that's a great answer. And
Yeah.
but I just wanted to say a little bit of like what had me, other than just enjoying talking to you in general, really wanting to have you on this podcast. So the title of it is Mind the Gaps. And the idea being, I try to evoke a lot with that, and you just hit one of them, is this gap between kind of where we are and there's a world that it feels like we should be in, or there's a way the world should be. At least it feels like it a lot of times to us, and it's not. But there's intimations of a
Mhm.
way that we could be, of a way that existence in life and being could be, that there seems to be a gap there. And also wanting to evoke the gaps between us, how there's this relational space, this intersubjective kind of story mythscape that seems to have a reality in a way that's non-trivial because it affects how we live and how we see the world. But it's kind of hard to pin down because it's not the kind of thing you can pin down because it does exist in the gaps. And in all of the ways that there are many things that seem to be really important to the human life that seems to exist, and maybe all of the things that are really important to us seem to exist in the gaps, in these places that are kind of
Mm.
hard to see, and well, as maybe we'll get into, are a little bit more like music and kind of really rely on the relations between things as opposed to just focusing on the things themselves.
Mhm.
And so that's why I figured you'd be a great person to talk to about this. And I figured we'd start. I have a couple quotes. I was just going through some of the chapters of your book earlier before we came on here, and figured I would just throw some things at you and ask you to open it up, and then we can talk about it a little bit.
Mhm.
And this was the first thing I read when I opened it today, and it feels like a perfect place to start because when you talk about your wife helping you figure out how to read Barfield, this quote kind of encapsulates when I started approaching a lot of this stuff and where I see a lot of people get stuck. Um, this sentiment seems to be a prerequisite for starting to get into this. Knowledge only works when there's room for trust, which is not knowing.
Mhm.
And that just struck me so deeply because in that chapter, you were talking about technology and the ways that technology can kind of, when it becomes the center point and an end in itself, it stops serving us. And there's a way that knowledge in general has that sense that when we get too locked in on what we think we know, it actually shuts off our ability to know more and locks us into a frame
Mhm.
we can't get out of. And so I figured that would be a decent place to start. And I'm curious just yeah, what comes up for you as I bring that up?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I mean, that's interesting that actually a lot of ancient saints talk about unknowing as the starting point for any true knowledge, because it seems like there's a true knowledge and uh, I wouldn't call it not knowledge or false knowledge, but it's just like there's information, there's facts, and there's true knowledge, and um, so how would I put this? Um, Basically, if I uh, look at the world and I look at the trees out there, or I look at the rain, and all I uh, think and all I know about these things is what is on the surface, at the surface level. I will only go as far as like seeing H2O and seeing, that kind of a wood structure out there. and I will not be able to see past that. And the moment I deify the form, I sort of put on a kind of a lens through which to look at the world. And this lens doesn't allow me to see more than meets the eye.
Hmm.
And
So can I ask
uh-huh.
what's some of the more when you can start to take that lens off and see through a different lens or a lensless space?
Yeah,
What's some of the more you can start to get in contact with?
well, yeah, that's the logos actually, because if I assume, just like in Tolkien's Silmarillion, Silmarillion starts with God Iluvatar singing the world into existence, and the individual themes that he sang actually are represented by these, Ainur, Valar, that sometimes they're called. And each Valar, each of these powers also represents some tangible substance in the world. So basically, the music of God, music of Iluvatar, became tangible. And when like elves and hobbits and everybody else in Arda, in the created realm, in Tolkien's universe, when they come get in touch with that substance, whatever it is, it's water or air or stars or anything, they do not just see the appearance, they see more than that appearance. And Tolkien, alludes to that a lot, many times, that when an elf hears the sound of water crashing against stone, they don't just see, what meets the eye, the surface, but they actually hear the music of Iluvatar, that original music. And that's why Galadriel was warning Legolas that as soon as you hear the sound of seagulls crying, your heart will be yearning for that place ever since, because because she knew, as an elf, she knew what kind of music is awakened in the heart of an elf. Um, so that's a very interesting way to capture that idea that everything we see around has been created by the logos, or through the logos, like John says in the beginning of his gospel. In the beginning was the word, and everything was created through that word. And so this logos is present. It's like the music of God. And so if I choose to limit my vision by only seeing the surface level, then I don't really commune with the meaning behind things. And I'm basically I've created an illusion of separation. I live in a separate realm, where I am an autonomous being without any connections with anybody else or with anything else. And that
Hmm.
seems to be the problem of the modern consciousness in general, that we do not our consciousness cannot really think in terms of participation relationships with anything. So
Yeah. So let me see if I'm getting you just in the frame that I'm holding it. My experience with this is the sense of, yeah, when I look at a tree and I just see wood, and and I hear the rain and I just think, oh, that's the sound of H2O hitting cement. That or whatever other frame. It might be even more abstract. It's like, oh, I the rain's coming down and I think, oh, that's bad. Now I'm gonna get wet and I have to change my clothes. Like, and that's how I'm relating to it. Whatever kind of, even that's a little bit more embodied already, but whatever kind of frame I'm bringing, where I'm just kind of seeing the fact of a thing or the surface of it, immediately cuts me off from getting to listen more deeply for how that rain or that tree or that instance of whatever it is actually participates in the dance of all that there is. That there is just the music of God, as you said. There's an outpouring of being that is all around us that we're always participating in. And it's when we get locked in our knowing, in a smaller knowing,
mhm.
that, well, that we forget that we
Yeah.
forget and experience the separateness that when we talk
Mhm.
about this gap between what what it appears that we are and what we feel we ought to be. We feel we ought
Mhm.
to not be separate, that we ought to be connected, that we ought to exist in love, and there be peace and interconnected and dance and art and beauty everywhere as far as the eye can see. Like, it seems like if everything was good, it would just be like that. And we're in this way that we don't have that. We feel separate and we have to fight, and there's all these other things that happen. And at the root of that is this seeing things as entities separate and as this kind of condensed fact, and kind of getting trapped in the knowledge
Mhm.
that we think we know what something is that
Yeah,
blocks us from seeing the rest. Am I getting that? Is that a good way to
that's
put
right.
that?
That's right. Oh yeah, there's a lot there. I think there's an illusion of knowledge, basically. An illusion of knowledge is when I deify the form, and when I look at whatever, a person or a thing, anything, and I say that there's nothing else beyond the appearance. And so uh, at that moment, my mind is sort of like, how would I put this? Um, gets the mind gets the illusion that I can know this tree or this rain by collecting data, and that's where modern technology comes in, because basically, like AI, what is AI? It's like a huge data aggregation mechanism, and and uh, it's not intellect, of course. I mean, I don't know why people call it art. It's not intelligence, of course. It's something else.
Mm-hmm.
But it gives off this illusion of knowledge. But whenever we confuse like information and data with knowledge, we really are locked in this separation mindset,
Mm.
because we cut ourselves off from the realm of sense making and meaning at that particular moment. So
Yeah. And so I just want to emphasize, because what I don't hear you saying is that knowledge is bad or technology is bad or all these things are bad inherently, but it's really, I guess one word you'd use is the idolatry or the focus or the deification of those things kind of for their own
yeah,
sake, not in service to
yes,
to
yes,
the
yeah,
music. And
yeah.
so that brings me to another quote, a chapter from this that was how powerful are the Ents? So for you Lord of the
Mhm,
Rings fans out there, the Ents are the big trees that go fight and take out Saruman at Isengard when he's building all of his machine, and it's a real powerful image of nature versus the machine. And
mhm,
there are more simple ways that we could think about that, of like, we're doing all of this technological growth and it's affecting the environment, and now Earth is kind of striking back, and there's all sorts of ecological problems that come with that, which is not incorrect, but I hear it a deeper thing actually getting played out there. And what you evoke is this idea of the machine versus art, because in
mhm,
some ways art and machinery are very deeply linked. They're not very far apart. They're both creations of man, creations of human. They're things that we
mhm,
create. And you make this emphasis on the difference of kind of a dominating, imposing a will versus a growing, which is what the
mhm,
Ents are. They grow because they're trees. And you talk about the power of growing prevails over the power of the machine.
mhm.
So I'm curious you to say a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's basically the whole scenery. I mean, I can vividly imagine the battle for, um, with Isengard. Remember that scene in the movie where the ants, they're basically, what are they? They started as small shoots, small sprouts, small like little trees basically, and then they grew, and they broke through rock. They grew and they grew, and then they became ants, right? So the idea of something that is growing from within, as opposed to it's not my comparison. It's actually Tolkien's comparison.
Mm-hmm,
He
mm-hmm.
was talking a lot about the machine as the tool of the enemy, or the ultimate technology, versus the art of the elves, which is inherently different than that. And basically, you were saying that the art of the elves is something that grows from within, from who they are, from from their true nature, from basically from their names in some mystical sense. Whereas technology is like an external tool or an external technique that helps me to get from A to B without any reference to who I am or what is inside me. It's basically like like $100 bill, and whoever holds the $100 bill can do so much. So that kind of thing. Whereas at least in Tolkien's mind, the art in general, and elvish art in particular, is something that is so deeply connected with who they are and grows out of who they are. It looks almost like magic, because remember those magic cloaks that the hobbits wore and that protected them from the enemies, and the magic robe that Sam had, and all other magical things like lembas bread, etc. So it looks like magic, but the difference is crucial, because the magic of the elves is not the machine, because it springs from who they are, like it springs from the earth. So in Tolkien's mind, there's a huge difference between the power of something that grows versus the power of something that is made to dominate. Or just like black magic is basically like an external technique that you take and you use, and it's not interested in who you are, in your character, or anything in you, as long as you push the right button, or throw the right, things into your pot, and then you get what you want, basically. So that's how you domineer in this world. And the answer, these are amazing creatures, because in the end they prevail over the machine of Saruman. But yet there's, in the movie and in the book, you read how Saruman wanted to exterminate Fangorn forests in the first place, and how he sent his orcs to basically use the trees as the fuel for the machine. Because it's on the one hand, it's easy. I mean, it's very easy for a human being. It doesn't take much to step on a little shoot, a little blade of grass. You can easily knock it off with a stick or something. So in our minds, it doesn't amount to much, and yet with time, because ants are the creatures of time, they grow into something so big and large that even technology is not able to withstand that power.
Yeah.
So
So
that kind of represents what grows inside of us, because you and I are those ants. And you know what? It's so exciting to even think about that, because we all have small beginnings, like little sprouts of something, like acorns. We're all acorns. And we don't really kind of, how would I say this, give justice. We don't realize how much power we have, because it really looks like a really small and humble thing inside of us. And yet, if we keep growing little by little every day in that particular thing that is inside us, it's going to grow into an incredible power, and it's going to have an incredible impact later on down the road. And ultimately, no technology will be able to stand against that. So this is really mind-boggling. So
there's so much there.
yeah.
Let me see if there's a couple of things I want to pull on and maybe put into this. Well, so one thing I really want to do that with this podcast, but also just with my writing, and I experienced this from yours, and that why this stuff feels so important, is the way that actually participating with these stories and using these frames for seeing things actually affords agency and affords growing in the way you're speaking. Like there's a way that there's a kind of seeing here that has, well, that affords that growing. And one way that I'm kind of grappling with, that I thought we could just play with a little bit, is this link between knowledge and technology, and knowledge and frames. Because you could say, like, when I see something as H2O, I'm framing it a certain way, and that gives me power. Like I can interact with water in a way when I'm looking at it as a chemical with this structure. There's a power I have. There's a way I can use water that when I was just seeing it as wet stuff, I didn't have that. So the frame actually has a lot of power to it. And I can imagine that the first chemists that started looking at things in these ways, it was art to a degree. Like there was like a real discovery that was flowering out of just the pure joy of discovering more about creation.
Yes.
But what made me think of this is when you named how Saruman was using the trees to build the machine, using them to fuel it, and how things that grow organically can be used and subverted by the machine. And there's something that I want to play with, which is, so in this idea of, someone came up with this idea of a chemical bond, and that was like, wow, this beautiful thing that lets us see the world more deeply, and then we made nukes. It's like, and we're like, it's like, oh no, like I didn't see this happening. And so there's a way that our frames, if we have all these external technologies, frames are like internal technologies, but they still have the same ability to give power and give power over the world. And so what I'm hearing in the art versus machine distinction is that true art, seems to have a way of, it still gives you power over a world, but in a way that's in tune with the song, with the original music, we could say. And one thing in terms of frames that I want to ask about, in terms of, because in some way what you're offering is a frame. There's a way we're talking about trees right now, and ents and rings and all of this stuff of fairy tale and stories, but it actually gives us a frame to look at and see the world and see aspects of the world that we couldn't see otherwise. And I guess one thing I want to ask, and I don't know if I have a great answer to this either, but there's a way that participates, or at least has the opportunity to participate more in the domain of art, more in the domain of tools and service of the music. And there might not be a great answer to this, but I'm curious your thoughts. Is like, what, maybe as artists, widely construed, like not just making artistic creations, but like wanting to live artfully in this way, what as artists is there to do, if anything, that can either prevent or lessen the chances of your art becoming fuel for the machine?
Well, I don't really know how to prevent your art of being used by the machine, except that, like, if it's true art, I mean, it's going to reach some people. It still, it does, I don't think it protects it from being, maybe from being used as a fuel, because there's, I mean,
well, maybe I could scale this question down, because I think there's a level of this that's really hard to answer, but maybe just bringing it like into personal. Like for me, I noticed that looking at the world and living through stories, and really taking stories like this into how I frame my experience, in many, many ways, opens me to hearing the music in a way that, where actually it reminds me to look past the appearances and try to see how things fit in the bigger story and all of these ways. And that's proven very deep for me. And also, I see the ways how in my own life they can become machines where I grasp too hard on the stories and even find that I can idolize them and make idols out of these very frames that are giving me access to the music. And I was telling you a little bit about this before we started recording of just the quest I've been on recently is really trying to find how I can balance maybe not the surface appearances, but like let's call it the phenomenological, the immediate kind of embodied experience of reality with my frames. But I need to have a frame. I need frames to see reality, and there's at least something about story that has a kind of more encapsulating quality than, let's say, the scientific materialist frame. And yet, I still find I can get trapped in it and kind of need a counterbalance in I'll call it an unnarratived immediate experience that I can kind of have a dialogue between. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess that's just what I've been thinking about, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Mhm. Well, yeah. I mean, for some reason, I think about playing in a band. I understand you play in a band as well, and I do play in a band. There's several things that really strike me about being in a band. You can't really do your own thing. I play the guitar, right? I can't really do my own thing just by looking at the notes. I do have notes, and I can sort of follow. But if I just follow the notes without listening to what the other people are doing on their instruments, and if I'm not in the relationship with the whole, uh, the thing will not sound well. I mean, just to say the least, it may not sound at all like it should. It's a really great metaphor for our,
Mm,
like you say, living artfully, right? Whatever we produce. I mean, I might produce articles or books. You might produce music or something else, podcasts, but it kind of relates because unless I am in some sort of relationship with you, and if I'm able to, unless I'm able to open my eyes and open my ears and really hear and see what's going on, I will not be able to find those frequencies and resonances. And because in a band, unless you hear the other person's pitch, you will not be able to sing the right interval, right? You will not be able to join into the music, which is like a whole, indivisible whole, and a harmony. And so, yeah, it seems to me that on the one hand, it's really simple because it all starts with me just, even now as we're talking, opening my ears and trying to again go beyond appearances, go beyond the words, just to see what is Jake driving at, what is behind it, what am I hearing, what's going on, and then get those cues and see if there's harmony there, and then I can maybe say something that will be artful, and maybe you can say something that will be artful, because art is really, really true. Art is really sensitive to our ability to listen and see.
yeah,
I guess it's like responsive to that. I would even say that art, we don't really control art. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but then maybe it's not. Sometimes it's not that I cannot really contrive art. I cannot force it out of myself. It has to spring out, come out, or burgeon like a flower in me as a response to hearing this music in somebody else or in something else, in the rain, in the tree, in the person, or in that horn that I saw, on that peg behind you. It kind of, brought up some associations in me. And so these are incredible resonances that really bring out that art and artful living as well, because we cannot produce really artful living in ourselves. It has to spring out of, it has to be a response to a beauty that really, really, kindles something in us. And then we keep doing it because we follow it.
Mm,
So I don't know. I
yeah.
don't know if I'm
Yeah.
responding. I don't know if I don't know if I've heard you. So
No, I
sorry
think
if
I
I'm
think
off.
I think you did. Because
Okay.
I think the imperative thing that I heard, as you said multiple times, it's about listening. It's about hearing and but and sensitivity. Because
Mm,
I might be in a band and I'm following the notes, and if I don't have good ears, maybe I have to rely on the notes to
mm,
do best I can. But that'll only get me so far. And if I'm just relying on my map, on the notes, no matter
mm,
how good it is, I'm not actually sensitive to what's really happening. And
exactly.
and there is that increasing sensitivity. And yeah, so I think you're speaking exactly to what I was talking about, because I think that's a perfect way of putting what I was speaking to as well, as a continual recognition of training my sensitivity to listen to the world. And we
Mm,
listen not just with our ears, but with our eyes and our skin and our whole nervous system. We're just a big tuning fork for reality in some ways.
mm,
And and there's a way of continually, I love the music metaphor, because it's like I continually get more sensitive and more in tune,
mm,
and continually get better, well written music to play, like to read or to play or whatever. And it's like there is a dialogue between those, that
mm,
but it does very seem to be the case that listening deeply in attuning, it's like we wouldn't know what a good piece of sheet music, that it was good, if we didn't have listening to kind of put it to the test. Because
mm,
I think a big part of what I heard is I'm hearing a like a rhyme with Genesis. It's like God
mm.
spoke and said it was good. We listen and hear it was good and
Oh yeah,
respond.
yeah, 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 yeah. I love it. Yes, 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 yes. Totally. But it's interesting that the opposite is also true. I mean, if you remember the prologue to the Silmarillion, so this evil protagonist Melkor was like the devil figure. I
Mm,
mean, basically, the evil in Tolkien's world started with not listening, because remember that they were singing in chorus, or not in it was like it was some sort of chorus there, right? And at first they were listening, the Ainur were listening to each other, like singing one by one, or like in small groups, and Tolkien says they were listening, hearkening unto each other, because they didn't understand the mind of their brethren so well at that point. And then the more they listened to each other, the more they started joining in and creating this music of Iluvatar in the first place. But Melkor was really great at singing, and he was a really great musician, and he was really like this magnificent being. He kind of, it almost like he's portrayed like Lucifer. He was like representation of that fire and that light, sort of say the fire of Iluvatar. But it came into his heart to elevate his music above that of his brethren.
mm,
And that was the start of cacophony. How interesting that, you can, even in a band, I mean, we can feel it, how easy it is to create some, cacophony, some discord, by not listening and then trying to play your thing, louder than everybody else. It really, I mean, I've done that, so I know I
yeah.
know how to create cacophony, and it works. I mean, it ruins things everywhere. It ruins things in the family, or dynamic everywhere. Politically, I believe as well.
Yeah. Well, so this is a huge thing to open up to end this time, but maybe we can use this as like a kind of final thread to weave into this. Because I want to talk about Melkor a little bit, because there's a relation between the the kind of the cacophony that gets created in that, and this kind of, oh yeah, this prideful lifting up of one's own voice and shutting out the listening that ends up getting woven back in to a more beautiful song, and it has a relation to what Tolkien calls the strange gifts of men. Like there's
Yeah.
our propensity, our fallenness, you could say, our propensity to sin, to do just that, to
Mhm.
overemphasize our part and create chaos and noise. But there's a way that the music is so good that it took was able to Iluvatar was able to take that back up and actually make a more beautiful harmony out of it. And I always
Mhm.
think about like jazz as an amazing symbol for it. Like what an
Oh yeah.
instance of creating noise and dissonance and cacophony, but in an effort to actually bring forth a greater, more complex harmony. And
Mhm. Mhm.
so I'm a thing that I think, whether we know it or not, we all deeply wrestle with is is how to do the work to bring um our propensity towards pride and cacophony inducing
Mhm.
music, how to bring that in to a greater harmony.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Wow, that's a big one.
It's
I mean,
maybe a big one, yeah, a little bit.
well, I guess kind of boils down to humility. But I know humility is really a really mysterious thing for me because uh, I mean, if I'm honest with myself, I'm not a very humble person. I mean, I can catch myself wanting to elevate my music above that of the others. And and but the moment I do become aware of my desire to sound louder than everybody else, that's a really humbling moment. A moment of awareness is a humbling. But it's very interesting that we just came back from Lake Tahoe, the place we really love traveling to. And one thing you feel when you are in front of so much, oh, you are in Colorado, so you see it every day. But I mean, when you are in so much beauty and you see those lakes, you see those glaciers, you see the mountain peaks, and you walk up those mountains, at a certain point, you seem to be so humbled because you're so small and the mountains are so huge and the world is so huge and the beauty of the world is so huge that you feel humbled, but at the same time, you don't feel diminished.
Mm,
You don't feel diminished at all. In fact, you are honored and somehow uplifted by this strange ability of beauty to humble you in a in an uplifting way. You know, you know what I mean. So I do believe that really speaks into God's ability to humble us without actually diminishing us. And I think that, you know, if I look at myself, uh, the reason sometimes I don't humble myself is because there's this ego that doesn't want to be diminished. You know, oh, I want to be something, I want to be somebody, you know. But the truth of the matter is, when you encounter real beauty, your ego is not diminished at all. It's actually it's treated very gently, and it
mm,
just disappears by itself, because when you are up against something so large and so incredibly mind-blowing, that you really forget about yourself. It's like C.S. Lewis said, true humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less.
mm,
And that kind of speaks into it, that when I see so much beauty in, like, in those peaks in the Lake Tahoe, everywhere, uh, what happens with my ego? It doesn't get crushed. It doesn't get. I don't feel that those mountains are crushing my ego, but I do feel humbled in a really really gentle way, and then I sort of forget about myself. I don't really think. You can't think so much about yourself when you are standing on. You know, we just climbed this whatever it's called, Maggie's Peak. It's not that high, but it's about 8,000 feet. You stand and there's this chasm that opens right below your feet and goes for miles and miles and miles. I mean, who can think about himself at that? I mean, I can't imagine anybody thinking, "Oh, I must be so great at that moment," or "My music is so great," or I wanna I wanna be the loudest," or anything. It just doesn't come to a person's mind. Is the more so this is like, an incredible paradox that Lewis caught in this phrase that, humility is not about thinking less of yourself. It's not about, you know, necessarily crushing. Sometimes maybe ego needs crushing. I do believe that. But when we really meet with, encounter true beauty, we just forget about it. We forget about ego. We don't need it very much. So that's actually been one of huge motivation for me when I play in a band to actually start with, listening and becoming this tuning fork, because my thinking goes like, well, yeah, if I play well, I may elevate myself, but what am I actually getting out of it in final analysis? But if I'm able to hear this harmony, then I will really get something out of it. So it will be my ego, even my ego and my faults will be woven into this harmony, and
Mm.
we'll just forget about ourselves without actually losing, you know, without losing ourselves, being diminished in any way. So yeah, sorry if I'm rambling.
No, that was amazing. I
Okay.
was just gonna say that that seems like about as beautiful a place as any to start to wrap this up. So any other closing words other than those amazing ones you just gave that you want to
Well,
give the people before we head out?
well, thanks for inviting me. It's such a great conversation. I just want to encourage you to keep up with that, because these conversations are part of the artful living that you were talking about at the beginning. Yes, because the more I live, the more I just realize that, it's the um, we can, as human beings, we can really be happy in connection with something larger than ourselves. And so as we participate with each other in conversations like this, we really start sensing deeply, emotionally, and how to say it, incarnationally, so to say, if I can
Mm.
use this, in an embodied way, we can start sensing that we really belong to something larger, and that's what makes us who we are. So, so
Yeah, amen. I,
thank you,
amen.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I do my best to listen well and play well. I was about to
Well,
say
me
listen
too.
play better, but maybe it's play well and listen better.
Yeah. Well, me too. Me too. Thank you so much. It was good seeing you.
Yeah, thank you. You too, my friend.